stand before number 1, 1950, the work famously known as Lavender Mist, and you are not met with an image, but an atmosphere. It is a labyrinthine haze that seems to vibrate before your eyes, a sprawling web of oil, enamel, and aluminum paint that refuses to offer a single place for your gaze to rest. In traditional Western painting, the eye is guided, led gently from a foreground figure to a background horizon, a choreographed journey through perspective and narrative. But Pollock destroyed the map. Here, there is no center, no hierarchy, no beginning, and certainly no end. The composition is all over, a relentless, democratic distribution of energy that extends to the very edges of the canvas, suggesting that the painting itself is merely a fragment of a much larger, infinite continuum that continues beyond the frame. It is overwhelming, yes, perhaps even suffocating to some, but it is undeniably alive. For decades, the uninitiated have stood before these canvases and scoffed. My 5-year-old could do that. They see a mess. They see the aftermath of an accident, a spilled bucket, a temper tantrum thrown in pigment. This interpretation relies on the assumption that chaos is easy, that disorder is the default state of the unskilled. But to confuse Pollock's work with randomness is a fundamental error of perception. If you were to walk up to the canvas, close enough to smell the acrid bite of the industrial enamel, you would see that the accidents are suspiciously absent. When paint is thrown haphazardly, it pools. It mixes into a muddy, indeterminate brown. It splashes without rhythm. But look at the surface of Lavender Mist. The skeins of paint sit distinct and proud upon one another. A thread of black weaves under a lash of white, which is then crossed by a staccato rhythm of rust orange. They do not bleed. They coexist in a suspended state of tension. This is not the result of a man flailing blindly. It is the record of a man who has achieved a terrifying level of control over a medium that wants to be uncontrollable. Pollock liberated line from the burden of describing an object. A line was no longer the edge of a shoulder or the horizon of a landscape. The line was the event itself. The skepticism surrounding Pollock often stems from a desperate human need for recognizability. We want to see a face, a tree, a story. When denied these anchors, we feel adrift. Yet this visual noise is actually a sophisticated new language. Pollock wasn't trying to hide a secret image behind the splatter. The splatter was the structure. He was constructing a visual field that mimics the complexity of our peripheral vision, a sensory experience that feels more like being in an environment than looking at a picture. The chaos is a facade. Beneath the frenetic storms of pigment lies a deliberate architectural rigor that holds the composition together with the tensile strength of a suspension bridge. It is a paradox, a static object that feels entirely kinetic, a mess that feels perfectly balanced. We perceive this balance intuitively, even if our logical mind struggles to find the geometry to explain it. The painting breathes, it pulses, and that, as we are about to discover, is because it follows the same hidden laws that govern the natural world. To understand the painting, we must understand the performance that created it. Picture the barn in East Hampton, the floor cold and hard, the canvas rolled out, not on an easel, but flat against the ground. This orientation change was revolutionary. It stripped the painting of its window-like quality and transformed it into an arena, a stage for action. Pollock did not approach this arena with the delicate tools of the old masters. He discarded the palette and the fine point brush. In their place, he wielded dried sticks, hardened trowels, and basting syringes. He punctured the bottoms of industrial paint cans to let the pigment stream out like a vein opened up. He did not touch the canvas. This is the crucial distinction. There was almost always air between the tool and the surface. This gap, the space between the artist's hand and the destination of the paint, is where the physics of the masterpiece lives. When you pour a viscous fluid like honey or enamel paint onto a surface, gravity and resistance conspire to create what physicists call coiling instability. The fluid wants to loop and curl upon itself, creating little piles of coils. If you pour it slowly, it knots up. If you pour it from too high, it splashes. Pollock, without a degree in fluid dynamics, solved this equation through the sheer intelligence of his body. He learned that to create those straight, singing lines that shoot across the canvas like laser beams, he had to move his arm at a velocity that counteracted the fluid's natural tendency to coil. He was not merely painting, he was dancing. He moved around the perimeter of the canvas and often into it, engaging his entire body in a rhythmic ritual. It was an athletic, exhausting endeavor. The flick of a wrist was replaced by the sweep of a shoulder. The delicate dab was replaced by the lunge of a torso. The paint became an extension of his nervous system. If he was anxious, the lines became jagged and staccato. If he was flowing, the arcs became long and lyrical. The canvas became a seismograph, recording the tremors of his internal state and the physical exertion of his external movements. This technique, which critic Harold Rosenberg dubbed action painting, was a violent break from the rigid constraints of European modernism. It was raw, American, and primal, but it was also a reflection of the era. The world had just emerged from the shattered reality of World War II. The atomic bomb had revealed the terrifying energy locked inside matter. A polite, realistic portrait could no longer capture the zeitgeist. Pollock's method, harnessing gravity, velocity, and viscosity, mirrored this new understanding of the universe. He was working with the fundamental forces of nature, collaborating with gravity rather than fighting it. When he exclaimed, "I am nature," he wasn't being arrogant, he was describing his process. He had become a conduit for the same physical laws that shape the flow of rivers and the growth of branches. He wasn't depicting the wind, he was acting like the wind. And in doing so, he managed to freeze motion in time, trapping the energy of the dance within the hardened enamel, leaving us with a fossil of pure momentum. For decades, we accepted the emotional power of Pollock's work as something mystical, a vibration that couldn't be quantified. But in the late 1990s, the physicist Richard Taylor looked at these drips and saw something familiar, not in the world of art, but in the world of mathematics. He realized that the chaos of a Pollock painting possessed a specific hidden geometry known as fractals. A fractal is a pattern that repeats itself at different scales. Think of a coastline. Seen from a satellite, it is jagged. Zoom into a cliff, it is jagged in the same way. Zoom into a rock, jagged again. Trees branch into smaller branches, which branch into twigs, all following the same structural logic. This is the geometry of nature. Taylor analyzed the paintings using computer algorithms and discovered that Pollock's drips were statistically identical to these natural patterns. He found that Pollock's works have a specific fractal dimension, or D value. A straight line has a dimension of 1. A filled plane has a dimension of 2. Pollock's paintings hover in between. In his early drip period, around 1943, the D value was low, around 1.45, sparse, loose, cobweb-like. But as he mastered his technique, as he honed that intuitive dance with physics, the D value climbed. By 1952, works like Blue Poles reached a D value of 1.72. The paintings became denser, more complex, filling space with a richness that borders on the infinite. This discovery shattered the idea that these paintings were random. You cannot create a high D-value fractal by splashing paint aimlessly. The math will expose you. This is why a fake Pollock never looks quite right. A forger might mimic the colors and the gestures, but they cannot mimic the multi-scaled consistency of the fractal structure because they lack the organic, internalized rhythm that Pollock spent years refining. The forger creates scales of blobs that look different when you zoom in. Pollock's chaos remains self-similar, consistent from the macro view of the gallery floor to the micro view of a magnifying glass. But perhaps the most profound revelation is why we love them. Scientific studies have shown that the human visual system is evolutionarily hardwired to respond to mid-range fractal density with a physiological reduction in stress. It is the same effect as looking at clouds, flames, or a forest canopy. When we stare into the dense, tangled depths of a Pollock, our brains are not processing art in the intellectual sense, they are processing a natural environment. We feel a resonance because the painting speaks the native language of our biology. In the end, Pollock's genius was not that he rejected the past, but that he bypassed the intellect to access the primal. He didn't paint a picture of a forest, he painted using the same algorithm that the forest uses to grow. He proved that true expression isn't about imposing your will upon the canvas, but about surrendering to the flow of forces greater than yourself. The code hidden in the chaos is not a secret message, it is the fingerprint of the universe, captured in paint.